As we look to brighter days, what is the health of the Sharks cap going into next season?
You're Locked On Sharks, your daily podcast on the San Jose Sharks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, welcome to Locked On Sharks, the premier hockey podcast covering your favorite lovable losers in the Bay Area. My name is JD Young, contributor at San Jose Hockey Now. I want to thank you for making Locked On Sharks your first listen, proudly part of the Locked On Network. We cover your team every day, even when horrible, unspeakable atrocities happen in Nashville, even when this team has lost 15 out of the last 17 since the All-Star break, even when this team is just the worst team in the NHL. If you want to be an everyday, all you have to do is just follow wherever you get podcasts, or you can watch on YouTube as well. And today, instead of talking about that game that happened, we are going to look to brighter days and look at kind of where the Sharks cap is at. We're going to look at kind of the health of the Sharks cap, how much spending power Mike Grier is going to have, and which guys, current Sharks, are going to be in need of new contracts. So before we get to all that, do want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. So things happened in Nashville. We are not going to be discussing those because I don't want to talk about like the Sharks getting there. There's literally nothing to pull out of that game because, yeah, it was bad. The Sharks played bad, and they look like a team who is done and ready to go home. So luckily, I have a nice list of break in case of emergency episode ideas that I kind of keep in my phone in case things like this happen. So we're going to break glass in case of emergency. We're going to talk about the Sharks cap space because, again, looking towards the future, looking towards that great next Sharks team, and seeing how Mike Grier this offseason can add some pieces if he wants to, because he's going to have to add some pieces. So let's start by looking at which players are actually going to be on the Sharks heading into next year, who are signed onto the Sharks team heading into next year. So as of right now, the Sharks, they have 11 contracts heading into next year. These are guys who are signed. They will be scheduled to be on the team next year. So those guys include, it'll be, you go take one off there. So anyway, let's see who they have. So they have Mikael Granlund, who's scheduled 1 year at $5 million. Nico Sturm, 1 year at $2 million. Klim Kostin, 1 year at $2 million. Fabian Zetterlund, 1 year at $1.45 million. William Eklund on his ELC at $863,333. Giovanni Smith at $800,000. And Logan Couture, who's on IR right now. So there is your forward group that is scheduled to be on the team next year. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 forwards right now. Last I checked, you need 12 to play a game. All right, for on the blue line, you're going to have Vlasic, Ferraro. So Vlasic has got 2 years left on his $7 million deal going into next year. He's scheduled. We will talk about his future here in a minute. Ferraro, 2 years left at $3.25 million. Jan Ruda will be in the last year of his deal at $2.75. Kyle Burroughs at $1.1. Then you also have Matt Benning, who will be coming back from hip surgery at $1.25. And then for your goalies. All right, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 defensemen. Last I checked, you need 6. So 5 plus 7, That's 12. So I guess, yeah, this didn't count all the IR guys. So, and then you have two goalies who are both going to be on the roster at 3. So you have Vita Vanacek at 3.4 million, Mackenzie Blackwood at 2.35. Both of those will be in the last year of their contracts. So those are the guys who are expected to be on the team, or at least are scheduled to be on the team next year. The other cap hits you have to kind of keep an eye on. So the Sharks will also have a $100,000 cap hit from Nikolai Knizhov, who is in the Barracuda. He will have to pass through waivers, assuming if he doesn't make the team coming out of camp, he'll have to pass through waivers, and you'll carry a $100,000 cap hit because his contract is a little bit over. So his contract is at 1.25. The most you can kind of bury in the NHL, bury in the AHL, is at 1.15. So he will have a very small cap hit on the Sharks roster. And then, of course, the dead cap. So the Sharks will carry over $7 million in dead cap next year between Tomas Hertl's retained cap of 1.3875 $1,387,500. That'll be for the remainder of his contract. It'll be the last year of the Brent Burns retention at 2.72 million, and then 3 years left at Erik Karlsson's retention at 1.5 million, and then the Martin Jones buyout. So there'll be 3 years left on Martin Jones's buyout at 1.6666, etc. So, so we're in the down slope of the Martin Jones buyout. So, the dead cap will actually be if you combine all the dead cap numbers between the buyouts and retention, that'll actually be the Sharks' second highest cap hit next year behind Logan Couture. So it'll be Logan Couture, the dead cap, and then Mark-Edward Vlasic, and then Mikael Granlund. So at least scheduled into this season. So yes, the Sharks are going to have to fill out their roster, and this doesn't include any of the young guys who could come up, right? None of the Barracuda guys, but the Sharks are going to have to fill out their roster with some NHL players. So that is something to keep in mind. Like when the Sharks sign players, they have to sign players this offseason, and we'll look at the end. We'll look at kind of how much money Mike Grier is going to have, who's actually potentially going to be up there, maybe even make a potential mock team, or at least kind of see where we need to build some holes. But that's just kind of the health of the Sharks roster. So gone are the days of these long cap hits. They're the Sharks again. They only, even if you look at like in the forward group, right? There's only one forward under contract in the 25-26 season. And that's William Eklund on his ELC. Two forwards, with Logan Couture. I always miss the IR thing. So two forwards, you have Logan Couture and you have William Eklund. And we're not even sure of Logan Couture's NHL future, right? I'm just assuming he comes back right now, but there's a very real possibility that he does not come back. And we'll discuss that here later. But then, the defensemen, right? You have Vlasic, you have Ferraro, you have Kyle Burrows, and then Matt Benning, who are all signed through the 25-26 season. Like the Sharks, you guys have been, if you've been Sharks fans for at least a couple of seasons, like this roster is completely turned over from, what we saw even during the pandemic, right? So yes, there's going to continue to be a lot of change, but the Sharks are going to have plenty of space, and not only roster wise, but space cap wise to make some of these changes. So we'll look at, before we kind of get into that, we'll look at which guys on the Sharks are going to need or who are eligible contracts, and which guys who I think are going to be actually back. So we'll get to that here in just 1 second. Passion, drive, and patience, which bring home the winning trophy, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. With the eBay Guarantee Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guarantee Fit only available to U.S. customers. All right. So who needs a contract? You need a contract. Come get your contract. So, looking at the Sharks, who needs a contract? So, Kevin LeBanc, UFA, he will be gone. Right, gone. Mike Hoffman, UFA, also gone. Like both those guys will not be back, especially Kevin LeBanc. Maybe Hoffman comes back on like a super cheap, like 1 year vet type of like. Again, I think Hoffman, both those guys are gone. Alexander Barabanov, also a UFA. I don't think he will be back as well. Justin Bailey, Ryan Carpenter, both UFAs. I could see both those guys kind of hanging around, especially because they won't be expensive, right? Something to keep in mind. The vet min, 750,000 says the lowest you can sign a player for. Both those guys are making 775. Like you could offer them basically the same thing, right? If you want to offer them a 1 year, 800,000, something like that. Both those guys have been solid kind of AHL, NHL tweeners. Both of them would need to pass through waivers, just like we talked about with Knizhov. But again, Jacob McDonald, UFA as well. Who again could be gone, who knows? So, and then Devin Cooley, also a UFA, the Sharks goalie. I kind of made or Monday's episode, I kind of made the pitch of like I would be open to keeping Cooley around as your third goalie, especially if depending on what happens with kind of some of your with your goalies going forward. Also, Oscar Lindblom, who's buried in the AHL, UFA. I don't expect him to be back around. He could. I wouldn't be surprised if he goes back to Europe to play like that. That would be my guess. So, because I think his NHL value is gone, he can go play in Europe and have fun over there. So, now comes the fun is the RFAs. So these are your restricted free agents. So these kind of give you, these players are players where you have the rights to. And there's different versions of RFAs. So you have RFAs with arbitration rights, which means like there you can kind of go to court where each side will kind of pick a side. And you will see teams kind of allow players to go to that because it gives them a little bit it gives them basically a second buyout window opportunity, but we'll get to that if we need to get to that. So, Luke Cunnin will be an RFA with arbitration rights. Philip Zadina, RFA with arbitration rights. Keelan Addison, RFA with arbitration rights. And the same thing with Ty Emberson, RFA with arbitration rights. A couple other guys. Brandon Coe will be an RFA. So if the Sharks want his ELC will be done, but no arbitration rights because he hasn't played in the NHL. So the Sharks kind of still own his rights. And then Tristan Robbins and Jack Studnicka also RFAs with arbitration rights, and E2 Makanemi. So all those guys, arbitration rights there. Again, usually those deals are very small, especially because none of the guys have really done too much. When we get a little bit closer, we'll kind of dig into what their next contracts will look like. A couple other guys who are also RFAs, but they're a very special Group 2 RFAs. Bordeleau and Henry Threaten. Basically, what happens with these guys is they're still kind of in this tweener mode where they are still very early in their careers. They haven't maybe played enough NHL games, etc. Basically, they will be RFAs, but other teams can't offer sheet them, which means other teams can't offer them a contract. If you offer sheet, again, we'll get into this in the summer if we need to, but the quick thing is, if another team has an RFA, you can offer them a contract, and depending on the size of the contract, if you don't allow the contract, basically you get something back for it. And they have up to like 4 first round picks if it's like a crazy go look at like the Hurricanes and Canadians. There's some fun RFA stuff there. Very, very, very rarely happens, but so these guys are all, those are kind of all your RFAs. And of those guys, I expect like Luke Cunnin, I expect him to be back. I expect Phillips Zadina to be back. Of course, Thomas Bordelot to be back. Henry Thrun will be back. It'll be interesting with Kalen Addison. I still think he's worth kind of hanging around because, one, he won't cost very much, and two, I still think there is something there. But again, you also have some guys going to be pushing it from the Barracuda who kind of play the same role. And then Ty Emerson, who I know he's had some issues with his health this year, but I think he's been a very strong player for the Sharks. So, and again, like out of those guys, I think Luke Cunnin is already making $2.75 million. I think he probably gets the biggest contract. And when we get after the season, we'll kind of dig into projected contracts because Evolving Hockey does a really great job with some of these projected contracts. And we'll do a whole episode devoted to that because we have a lot of time to fill in the summer. But, and I think Zadina's contract, like I've said before, I would offer him the Fabian Zetterlund like $1.5 million for 2 years contract and let him kind of continue to go and develop because I think he has been very good. So those are the guys who are going to need contracts. If you going through all those guys, right, the Sharks don't have any like projected big contracts that they need to hand out. There isn't like none, even like none of these guys I think are warranting multiple like long-term commitments, right? And I think that's what Grier has wanted to do is try to clean out some of these big long-term contracts, and the Sharks have done that, trading away Carlson, trading away Hurdle, trading away, a projected long-term commitment in Timo Meier, who got an 8-year deal from the New Jersey Devils, trading away some of these guys in an attempt to try to clear up cap space that way. The Sharks will be because again, like you draft all these high-end top players, you're going to have to pay them at some point, right? And you need to kind of clear the deck. And this is kind of this big purge and reset that the Sharks have been doing here. And again, they've set themselves up very nicely where nobody really right now is in need of a big contract. I think the next big contract that'll be coming down the road will be the Eklund contract. That's the first one where I can that's going to be the one, right? That's going to be the kind of the next pillar contract in the Sharks, is what does William Eklund get? And the Sharks couldn't play the RFA. Maybe you get a bridge deal. Like there's plenty of stuff to do with that. Or does Mike Grier kind of do like what we've seen a lot of teams do, where when you have a young, talented player, you just lock him up long-term and kind of, so if Eklund, who will be 22, 23, Eklund will be 23 when that contract expires and he's getting ready to sign his next contract. So yeah, 22, 20. Yeah. Do you sign him to an 8-year deal that runs him through the prime of his career? And then you figure things out once that is like plenty of stuff to, for Mike Grier. But I think that is the next one where you're like big long-term contract, because again, Granlund, he's 32 by the time his contract's over. He'll be 33. Like some of these other guys, Nico Sturm, I think will be a trade piece at next year's trade deadline. Granlund could be the same thing. Klim Kostin is 24 and is, looks like he could be a nice piece, but I don't think, again, not someone you're not a foundational player type of piece. And maybe Zetterlund could be the guy, but I could see him getting, what if he gets like the Kevin LeBanc type of deal, right? Where it's like 4 years at like 4.5, 4 years at 5. But again, not that foundational contract that kind of sets, you kind of have to build everything else around. So where does this kind of leave the Sharks going into the offseason? So we'll talk about that next here on Locked On Sharks. If you're looking to get tickets for whatever event, maybe you want to go see the Giants play, maybe you want to catch a Warriors game with the playoffs, maybe you want to go see the Sharks for some reason, that's where you need to check out Game Time. They have killer last minute deals, all in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. The thing I love about Game Time is you can actually see what your seats look like before you get there, because there's nothing worse than getting to an event and realizing you have bad seats. Actually, the only thing is when you go to buy those tickets and then other companies slam a bunch of fees on top. With Game Time's all-in pricing, you know exactly what you're going to pay before you go to check out. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDON, LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, so where does this kind of leave the Sharks? So again, the roster, assuming all the healthy people come back healthy, they're going to have some space cap wise and space wise, right? Because again, you have Klim Kostin, Eklund, Giovanni Smith, Nico Sturm, Mikael Granlund, Logan Couture, and Fabian Zetterlund as your kind of forward group. Now, the Sharks could, maybe they get lucky and they win, then you have Celebrini potentially entering the fray. You have Will Smith potentially entering the fray. Like you have some potential pieces entering the fray, but again, all those guys are going to be making, the ELC contract is $950,000. Like that's the contract, right? For those guys. So it is, again, nothing kind of breaking the bank there for those guys. So even if, let's just say we get lucky, Celebrini and Smith both come over. So that's two more players on twos. That's 9 forwards. Daniel Gushin makes the team. Bordelot. Again, you still have some young players here, but the Sharks are still going to probably be looking. Again, I just don't see Grier and Quinn handing the team over to a bunch of 18 or 19 to 20-year-olds. I think he's still going to, like we've seen before, right? Try to get some NHL players like Nico Sturm, kind of like Luke Cunningham, some of these other guys kind of into the roster. That way he's not having to kind of rely on these guys here. So again, the Sharks are going to have a lot of cap space and room here. And that doesn't even on the defense, right? You still have Shakir Mukhamadullin, who I think is going to make the team out of camp next year. And then you also have Jack Thompson, who's again, I think is maybe he starts next year on the Barracuda, but I don't think he's going to be very long until he's playing NHL games, because I've been pretty impressed with Jack Thompson so far from my viewings of him. And again, Kyle Burrows, Jan Ruda, Matt Benning, like none of these guys should be progress stoppers for you. So heading in, like the Sharks are going to have plenty of cap space, and this number right now doesn't include whatever contracts you go to hand out to some of these other guys, but the Sharks are projected to have $38 million in cap space. Like it has been a long time since the Sharks have had this much cap space. They have projected cap space next year, a projected cap hit next year of $42,180,833. That is from active players. A dead cap hit of 7.27 for a combined projected cap hit of 49,455. Cap next year is going to be $87.5 million. So we're finally getting some cap space. It's going up by $4 million. And then the cap floor, which hasn't They haven't announced the cap floor, but this year it was 61 and change this year. So I expect the cap floor to go up a little bit. Maybe it's like 63. We'll just kind of ballpark 63. So the Sharks are going to have to do some work here just to get to the cap floor. And this doesn't include like if they buy out Marc-Edouard Vlasic, or if Logan Couture is like an LTIR type of candidate, like those cap hits, like the Sharks could have even more cap space if they wanted to kind of flex those levers, right, and kind of go through those. If I would assume now, especially with the Sharks potentially struggling to hit the cap space, I would assume Couture is probably just an IR candidate, and if they ever need to move him to LTIR, they could always do that. He's IR right now, so his cap hit still counts towards the cap. But again, the Sharks have so much cap space, and they kind of need that cap space to hit the cap floor right now. So remember, IR, your cap hit still counts when you're on IR. LTIR is where you kind of start to see that, a little bit of that safety, right? Like look at Vegas. So, all right. But again, Sharks are going to have plenty of spending power. We'll, as we get closer, we'll deep dive into the free agency class, who would be good fits, all that fun stuff. But the Sharks are going to have plenty of spending, and I don't expect them to spend it all, right? Again, you still have to budget because, you're going to have to pay Eklund. You're probably going to have to pay. You're going to have to pay Eklund. You're going to have to pay Will Smith, Quentin Musty, who we even mentioned, right? And we'll see what happens with Quentin Musty if he's NHL ready or not. Celebrating, like you're going to have to pay these young players at some point. So I expect the Sharks to continue to be smart with their spending, but they're going to have to spend some money going in this offseason to just, again, hit that minimum cap floor. And I still think, again, I don't think the Sharks want to be this bad this year, going again next year, right? You want to start to see that little bit of growth, whether it's Will Smith here, Celebrini here, Eklund continuing his growth and development, not being the worst team in the NHL. Maybe you're like the 27th worst team in the NHL type of situation. You want to start to see a little bit of growth, especially with so many young players on the team, where this year, again, was absolutely brutal. And I think Grier and Quinn and stuff, they're going to want to see some sort of growth and development and see some results out of it. So, Grier is going to have if Grier wants to be aggressive this offseason, he's going to have all the opportunity in the world to be aggressive and kind of continue to remake this roster. I still believe, though, he's going to be very smart with his signings. Try to sign guys who are either, one, can hold down the fort and later become tradable assets, or two, guys who fit kind of the plan, right? Guys who are still young enough, guys who fit what the Sharks are trying to be. And again, as we get closer to free agency and see who's actually going to become free agents, and we'll dive into that list a little bit more and projected free agents and all that fun stuff. So, I hope this was a better conversation than at least whatever happened in Nashville. So we'll be back tomorrow with another draft profile. Our good friend Steven Ellis joins us again, so make sure you guys are following along for that. You can follow along wherever you get podcasts, and of course you can watch on YouTube as well. You can follow the show on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Locked On Sharks. You can follow me on Twitter at MyFryHole. Until tomorrow, bye friends.